Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jim Horn with the Office of Wastewater Management at EPA, and I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar, Developing the Digital Water Workforce of the Future. I'll come back on in a couple of minutes to say a few more words, but before I do that, I'd like to turn to the Director of the Office of Wastewater Management, my boss, Andrew Sawyers, to give us some opening remarks. Andrew, we very much appreciate you being here. Andrew has a huge scope of responsibility, as I always like to remind him, as the head of the Office of Wastewater Management. I see his face there, but it really is true. And he's been a big champion of all of the water workforce work that we've been doing over the last few years. And we very much appreciate that. So Andrew, without further ado, I'll just turn it over to you. And again, thanks so much for kicking us off today.
Thank you, Jim, and indeed, my pleasure. This is such an important bit of work for us. And, you know, as Jim just mentioned, in terms of the scope of what we do in the Office of Wastewater Management, you know, we manage a lot of financial programs that impact communities across the country. We also manage a lot of permitting programs, the largest permitting program in the agency, the NPDES program. And at the heart of everything we do, frankly, whether it's permits or financial work, it's the workers across the country, the staff that support these programs, the staff at EPA. You know, I've often talked about just the incredible opportunity, obligation, frankly, to serve the men and women at EPA and frankly serve our citizens across the country. And, you know, we think about the workers that help to ensure, especially the work that we're doing now, help to ensure that we have safe, clean and safe water. That job obviously is no simple job. It's monumental, it's significant, and we do it with grade. We do it with aplomb. So I am often just so proud of the men and women we work with, not just within the agency, but externally at utilities across the nation. And so I think this conversation we're having here, and you know, Jim talked a little bit about just how important it is. I think it's fundamentally important for us to figure out ways and different ways, obviously, to ensure that we have the workforce of the future. He talked about the digital workforce of the future. And I think in many ways, the pandemic has sort of forced that conversation to happen. You know, many of us have been working remotely. You know, I read an article recently that talked about the water workforce, where many have actually been at the plants, but then there also been an evolution where not just staff, but it was sort of a hybrid environment, if you will. And so the digital water workforce of the future is something that we have to confront. It's something that we have to deal with, and it's something that we have to help evolve to ensure that water and wastewater workers, we have the appropriate water and wastewater workers going forward to help us maintain clean and safe water. So, you know, again, I want to, you know, I jump straight into it because we're so passionate about this work within the Office of Wastewater Management. But let me stop and just sort of acknowledge all of you for joining this conversation. Good day to you all, frankly. Thank you for joining the webinar and helping us to sort of discuss this incredibly important topic. Thanks to Jim and the team for hosting the webinar as part of our ongoing workforce series. Jim has been a champion on this as long as I've known Jim, and you know, my colleagues in the Office of Wastewater Management, we owe a debt of gratitude to Jim and the team that have been working on workforce. A special thanks to all the speakers that will be sharing their experiences with you today, for taking the time to share their knowledge and some of the incredible experiences that I think we can all learn from. I think, as you know, we all know, attracting and maybe more importantly, retaining a skilled workforce, a technically competent workforce is critical to ensuring that our nation's precious water infrastructure continues to provide clean and safe water, as I you know, commented on initially. The sector, I think, I'm an advocate for this sector, not just because I've been in there, but it's a meaningful, when you think about the jobs, they're meaningful they're, mission oriented, and you have a chance to make a fundamental difference in communities every day. It's not just a job to me. It's something that you love, you really treasure. And so I think, like many other sectors, the water sector faces the prospect of retirements. I mean, you look across the portfolio, next several years will be very interesting. And so I think it's important for us to figure out ways to attract new workers and give them the skills they need to work within this sector. And the environment, the work environment going forward will be very complex, requiring digital skills, as we talked about initially, and the ability for different types of technologies to help operate water systems more efficiently and effectively. And this is absolutely important that the sector actually continues to evolve, not just in terms of the workforce skills, but the type of technologies that are needed to modernize the sector going forward. And so as you think about these two, framing, if you will, the digital skills needed, the modernized technology needed going forward, I think we have a lot of folks out there who are, and will continue to be heart and soul of effective utilities in making sure that these two, frameworks, if you will, mastering the digital skills, mastering the technologies that are needed, are very much apparent and are developed going forward. And so it's essential that we involve our water workers in all aspects of the process of adopting the new technologies, new skills, assessing organization needs, developing solutions, setting priorities going forward. And so, I'd like to maybe, just reflect briefly several months ago on something that I think has had a profound impact on me, frankly, in terms of my view about the water workforce. Several months ago, Jim and the team within the Office of Wastewater Management, and frankly, several of our external partners, talked a bit about what I call the anchor institution, the water and wastewater utilities. And the framing behind the anchor utilities, that they play such a fundamental role in communities and how communities are built out. They're sort of the sources of these enterprise and jobs. They're the places where people know they can rely on the group of people who work there to ensure that they have safe and clean water. They become sort of the entity, if you will, that attracts and help to build out those communities. And wouldn't it be great for us to continue to attract, community members to be a part of that, to be a part of the thing that is most meaningful to those communities? And so, the idea of an anchor institution, and as new workers support those anchors, I look forward to seeing that. I would probably want to end on just a reflection over the last several weeks, several months. We have been doing a lot of work on the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, which was signed by the president, provides, frankly, one of the largest infusion of water infrastructure funding in history. At the centerpiece criteria for us is supporting workers going forward. And so I encourage you, I think we just released the document on our website. And for many of you who are thinking about workforce and the workforce of the future, there's a section in the memo, the implementation memo, that highlights the workforce going forward and how important it is. And that will be an emphasis for us as we look to implement the bipartisan infrastructure legislation across the nation over the next several months and years. And so as EPA, the states, the tribes, and communities prepare to use these funds, we will all make sure that the people that operate water and wastewater systems are an essential part of our efforts to make our nation's water clean and safe. I want to finally thank you again for inviting me and to just share a few thoughts with you. Look forward to the rest of the conversation, and thanks to everyone that will be participating. But exciting time ahead of us, a challenge, frankly, but this is an important challenge that I encourage all of us to embrace fully, making sure that we have a workforce that is prepared to help us build communities across this country and build workers and support workers to help with clean and safe water going forward. So Jim, I'll turn it back to you, but again, so appreciative of the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you all.
Thank you, Andrew. Very well stated. Really appreciate your time. If you can stay on, fine, but I know you're pretty busy. But we really appreciate your thoughtful words, and I think we'll use those as fodder for going forward. So again, thanks so much. Let me turn it back over to Alec Agee from our team. Alec is going to take us through some of the administrative details of the webinar, and then he'll turn it back to me and we'll get started with our speakers. So Alec, over to you, please.
Thanks so much, Jim, and thank you so much, Andrew, for those great opening remarks. Getting into some of the logistics for our webinar, please note that this webinar is being recorded and you all as participants are in listen-only mode. During the presentations that we have from our speakers, if you have questions for them, please submit your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your bar there. We'll be gathering those Q&A questions throughout each of the presentations, and at the end, we will be sure, hey Carolyn, be sure to answer those and try to batch them up as best we could. Next slide, Tori. If you're having audio difficulties with the webinar, please feel free to use one of these four numbers, and the webinar ID is down at the bottom. It's 160-437-6554. Next slide. And to start things off, we're just going to do a quick poll here. So please indicate which sector you currently work for. We'll probably give about 30 seconds to a minute for this poll. Thanks so much, everyone. Looks like we're getting plenty of responses in. Quite the diversity of attendees here today, so it's glad to see. I think just about 10 more seconds here, just a few more people to respond. I think Tori will cut that off about the 50-second mark. All right, now closing the poll now. Looks like we got quite the diversity of people. Anything you want to add in here, Jim?
No, it looks good, Alec.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for responding to the poll. Next slide. Just a reminder, this webinar, as well as past webinars, are all recorded and on the EPA website at that link right there. So if you have any follow-up questions that you would like to know about past webinars, case studies that the workforce team has developed, it's all at that link that Tori just dropped into the chat. Next slide. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jim, who will introduce our speakers and get these presentations rolling. Jim?
Thank you, Eric. Alec, I'm sorry, very well done. So we have two speakers today. I'm not sure what the order of the speakers was when we sent this out, but we're going to switch it up. We're going to have Shane Zondorf with the City of Fort Worth present first, and he'll be followed by Catherine Curtis with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, but also a very critical, important person in Baywork, and she'll explain what Baywork is during her presentation. So Shane is with the City of Fort Worth, Texas, and the Water Department, and I first encountered Shane a few months ago through Catherine, and I really wanted to have somebody from a utility that could talk a little bit about the journey, if you will. You know, how they are really, as Andrew said so well a few minutes ago, how they are really involving their workforce throughout all steps of moving toward greater adoption of new technologies and becoming, quote, developing the digital water workforce of the future. And so I think Shane is going to give us kind of the view from on the ground, if you will, how this works in practice. And I think very, very much importantly, that intersection between getting your people involved, you know, from the beginning all the way through implementation of these new technologies is a way to really to develop the long-term buy-in. So Shane, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you. And again, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Jim, and thank you very much. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank Jim and the staff, Alec, Tori, Andrew, for putting on these great events. I think this is a great opportunity to network and communicate and kind of share what's going on across the industry and what great things are happening out there. Secondly, I'd like to thank Catherine, who has been my partner in this effort for the last 18 months, and I'm sure she's going to go in depth on some of the things that Bay work and she's doing, but she's been a great mentor, a great partner in this effort, and I think it's a very important effort as we look ahead. And so today I'd like to kind of share you first with the process and looking at digital transformation. It's easy to focus in on the software or the technology or the tool that we're going to be using, and it's easy to look at the benefit and the gain that the industry and the utilities can have in that. But what's often overlooked is the impact that has on the people. And so I'd like to share with you our experience in terms of how do we implement and transform our workforce to be more digital, competent, while caring for the people, accounting for their impact and the effectiveness, and how we can field these technologies and transform our workforce. And then I'll close out by showing a few examples of us implementing the process that we talked about. And so starting off, I'd like to say the obvious, right? We've all heard a million times that advances in technology and remote working technology, smart systems, and a never-ending market of software advances in every facet of our business and industry has completely altered the way the workforce operates and the way that the workforce accomplishes their job. Some of this has come through normal, continuous process improvements within the utilities, while others, and Andrew mentioned it, have been really just thrusted upon us like a freight train due to COVID, security threats, and other environmental factors that are external to the utilities. And so navigating organizations and utilities through advances in technology is difficult in and of itself. But when you add on the other layers of our environment that are going on today, it becomes extremely difficult, especially when you're looking at over a third of the workforce, or just about a third of the workforce in this industry is eligible to retire in the next 10 years. And in some utilities, I know for the case of ours, that number is actually a third eligible to retire in the next 5 years. And so when you account for that, the need for new technologies, the need to attract talent that maybe didn't necessarily, think about the water industry, we need to start looking in that effort. So over the last 3 to 5 years, our utility has implemented many large-scale technology products that's changed the way we operate and interact with our customers, from the way that the frontline employees interact to the way the executive staff level interacts. And we've learned many lessons through this process. And so a good analogy is going to be is a maze. So if you go to the next slide. And so looking at this, in our efforts to implement new technology and software and just enhance our workforce to be more digitally competent, I mean, it starts out in the beginning of this maze where we will take a turn, go down a path, we'll hit a barrier, and we'll have to change course. And so what we would like to do is, and what we've learned over the course of the last few years is it starts and ends with the people, right? And in order to implement and transform a workforce, you've got to account for that. And so throughout our time here, we focus really on these 6 key elements. And it's begin with the end of vision, a communication, making it personal. You've got to evolve your utility from the job, knowledge, skills, and abilities and qualifications to your workflows and processes. The biggest thing is you got to empower your workforce to take ownership in these changes and evolutions in technology in the workforce. And then you really need to normalize digital transformation. So I'm going to break down each of these components. We're going to start with begin with the end in mind. Creating a compelling vision and a scalable vision that unites the workforce is essential. So when you're looking at things, we all like to see what the end state of this new technology and how the impact is going to be. And oftentimes we develop visions and we develop ideas that are very abstract, and very few people kind of can grasp on to what that really means for them. And so when you're creating this vision, you not only want it to be something that is eternal for the entire utility, but you want to make it scalable so that even the most frontline employee can understand what the advances in the workforce and the technology is all about. And it's foundational for the purposes of planning, and it provides the utility and the organization with a statement of accountability. This is where we're headed. It's clear, everybody understands it, and it's the vehicle that will help us get the workforce to see the need for the improvement and change if we can form that vision correctly. And so next slide. The second component of this is communication. And communication, what we learned, is perhaps the most important thing. I think we're all aware of it, right? But The method, means, and modes of communication has changed over the last decade. The advances in different communications with apps and messaging systems and emails, even Zoom calls has completely uprooted the way that we communicate, and honestly, the way that employees like to be communicated. So next slide, please. So one of the things that we have found that works great in terms of change comes from the Neuro Leadership Institute. And if you don't know about the Neuro Leadership Institute, I would recommend that you go out there and look at some of their articles and some of their theories and approaches. It's phenomenal, and I can say firsthand, it's what has helped our utility and what has helped us be able to wrap our head around how do we effectively communicate and relate to our employees. And it starts with the SCARF model. So the SCARF model is essentially a model that's based on the premise that change can impact employees in 5 domains. And their reaction to change can be in a positive or negative state, depending upon the way you communicate change to them. And so those 5 domains are status, and that is our relative importance to others, certainty, the ability to know what's coming in the future, autonomy, sense of control, relatedness, am I in the in-group or in the out-group? What does this change do to my social circle? And fairness, which is the perception of fair exchange in one entity having the same opportunity as another entity. And how this works is, let's just take a simple change of a reorganization in the office, and you're trying to find new office space, right? We all have been in this scenario where the office is a symbol of power, or it's a symbol of status, and people are threatened by it, and they go, oh, well, will I have an office or will I have a cubicle? And immediately they're put on this threat state, right? And so from experience, when we communicate change and I just interact and talk with employees through their entertainment of the potential change coming to course, I can hear where their threats are coming from. Oftentimes it's going to be certainty. Well, what does that mean for my job? Am I going to have to learn new skills, or am I going to have to change processes? Or and autonomy, will I have control over my normal processes? And so by understanding and having the communication with my employees, when it comes time to communicate change and an impact, I'm going to account for their preference and their threats, right? So if I go ahead and I know we're shuffling offices around in the workplace, and I have people that are threatened by status, I'm going to initially communicate them with, your office is not going to change in the sense that you will have an office. It may not be in its current location, but it will be this. Or your processes will not change. You're still the program manager, but we are going to change a few things here or there, right? So by acknowledging where their threats are coming from, I can form communication to put them in a reward state, which makes them more open to change, more acceptable to hearing what I have to say. Whereas if I'm bland and generic with it and I don't address their potential threats, they're going to immediately go into a threat state, which is anxiousness, distracted. They're going to be stressed. They're going to be skeptical, and they're going to resist change potentially. And so in terms of our communication, we've really learned that we need to understand our workforce, to each individual. We need to understand where they're coming from in terms of their sense of importance and where their threats come with change, so that in our first and immediate communication with them, it can be tailored to them. And we can recognize that, our goal here is to put everybody in a reward state, because that's going to help us further down the line, as we begin to implement the different phases of change. Next slide, please. So the next two, I'm going to group it together. And the biggest thing about change is, I'll go back to the SCARF model, is that certainty, the sense of the unknown, right? And what's in it for them. And so we've got to make the change personal. When you're speaking in generalities, it leaves individuals open to their own perception of what's going on. It leads, people to come up with their own theories as far as what's the end state, the impact. And that is going to complicate our change, especially in the world of technology, because there are already these perceptions that technology is going to replace manpower, or technology is going to make my job more complicated. Or what we have found is people will look at technology and say, well, I'm going to do my current stuff, and now I'm going to have to do more. And so we need to make it personal, and we need to understand, for the employees, they need to know what they're going to stop doing, what they're going to start doing, and what they're going to keep doing. Additionally to that, as we begin to make that change personal, more often than not, it's going to change the way that their job is being done, or it's going to change the skill set level. And so oftentimes, and what we've learned is, as we implement technology, We get to the implementation stage, we're now fielding it and testing it. And all of a sudden we realize, wow, we need to equip the skill set of this specialty a little bit more because they weren't prepared for that change. And that's something we learned that we need to do on the front end. So next slide, please. So we go through and we looked at it from two different perspectives, right? We all understand in making it personal, it's time consuming, because if you look at the size of a utility, utilities are ranging in size from, tens to hundreds to over 1,000 people. In our utility, we have 1,000 people. And when you're talking about implementing large scale change, it can get pretty complicated when you get down to the individual job, the impact it's going to have. And so we formed these two worksheets that we like to use. And it's called the Moving From and Moving To worksheet, which really is all about identifying what the current state for this employee is, pre-implementation of new technology, pre-emphasis of the focus on digital transformation, and the actions they take and the results they get from that. And then we look ahead and say, okay, now with this new implementation of technology, or with this focus on digital transformation, where do we need to move your job or your position to? And then we talk through it. Okay, what actions do you take in the future will you take to get through this? And what results and actions and behaviors do you need to really focus in on to make this change? And once we have it, and it's really in the broad at this sense of kind of broad statements that encompass all of their duties and all of the results and performance standards that they have. Then we take that worksheet and we move it over to the Keep, Stop, Start worksheet, because this is where security comes from with the perspective of the employee. This is where they know what the true impact is going to be, but also this is what we know where we're going to have to develop people on in specific areas. And so when we look at the Keep, Stop, Start worksheet, what are we going to keep doing after the implementation of this tool? What are we going to start doing that's new after the implementation of this tool? And then we're going to scrutinize that list and say, okay, are they equipped and trained and educated to do those tasks? And that's where the first line of kind of identifying the gap between current state and future state in employee development begins. And then what are we going to stop doing? And that has been the challenge. I can tell you that people find sense and comfort in doing tasks they've done for many, many months or many, many years. And regardless of the change, they always want to revert back to their old processes because they have that sense of security, or their job has evolved. They're taking on more responsibility, but they still like this task. And so they bring it with them. And that happens all throughout utilities across the nation. And so when you're talking about what to stop doing, then certain conditions need to be met, whether that's you reach a certain phase in the implementation of the technology, or you hand off the task completely to somebody else, but you need to identify those conditions on what it's going to take to stop doing that, because that is what we found in terms of technology. That is really going to be helpful, because initially people are skeptical of tools and technology when they don't understand the background and what's going on with the software or the system or the tool that we're using. And so we find that they duplicate their efforts, right? They'll do it once the new way, and then they'll do it again the old way. And it's very counterproductive, and we need to make sure that we have the mechanisms in place to really allow them to be comfortable in stopping doing those old processes or old ways, and start adopting the new ways of operating. And so through this, we've really been able to make it personal, and we've really been able to get employees at all levels to understand the impact of change. And we've noticed that in doing those types of sessions, usually it would be, we would go down and we'd start doing this type of work with groups, and then we take it down to individuals. And then at the end of this process, there's a sense of comfort in knowing what is changing and what is staying the same for their job. And so when it comes time to hit the next phase of the change, they're open to it. They're actually motivated. They're excited, because there's no question marks as far as what their future role is going to be. Next slide, please. So this is perhaps the most powerful approach to take when it comes to change. Change can be viewed in many different ways. Change can be looked at as directive, right? We oftentimes are, when you're around the water cooler, the old saying is, and now that's not the case anymore. But it's, oh, well, they just want to change. There's a new manager in town, or oh, there's, you know, just this constant need of just changing just for the sake of changing. And they feel like it's just being thrusted on them and they have no say, they have no part in this change. The easiest way to break down resistance to change and you know, skepticism with change is to empower them to take part in the change, lead them through the change, and give them the ability to take part in some of the development of the processes, the timeline. You know, when are we going to go through and look at doing the training? What training needs to be done? As to the best possible extent, try to involve key people that take place of key processes in whatever you're changing at the earliest stage possible. And so what we like to do, and this comes from the Neuro Leadership Institute as well, is, next slide, please, is use the CREATE model, right? So with change, you've probably heard, well, this is the way we've always done it, or this is something that has worked for us. Why change if it doesn't work, right? There's very intense focus on the tactical aspects of it. And sometimes employees don't realize the strategic and the operational impacts and why we're evolving the utility or the organization towards adopting more highly technical tools or software. And we need to first acknowledge the past and the current reality that they're in. And it just comes in sake of, you know, walk me through what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, all right? Now let's take a look at this tool and explore alternatives of how this tool can better help you do your daily job, right? You said you spent a lot of time doing X, Y, or Z. Well, let's look at some other ways through the implementation of this new technology that you'll be able to do more with less time, or, you know, focus in on other key areas outside of, you know, this portion of the job that takes the most time. And you start to provoke thought by them and saying, well, how else could you use this? Or how else could this be beneficial? One of the questions I like to ask is how, you know, in looking at adopting this new technology and exploring different alternatives, how could you help others do their job? What does this mean for you in the sense of the people that work around you, or that you know, have cross-sectional or cross-divisional workflows with? How can that benefit them? Right. And you really put it into their court of, oh, well, you know, this is what we could do, or, oh, I need to talk to so-and-so. And once you start to see it, because it'll be like a light bulb that'll go off when you're in this explore alternatives arena, you'll see the moment of buy-in, and they're like, oh yeah, you know what? I could do this, I could do that. And then that's where you tap into that energy and you could empower them to do more, right? And say, well, hey, it sounds like you have a great grasp on what we're trying to achieve here. So you know what, how about you take it upon yourself and get a core group of people that are involved in this process, and you look at how to best adopt this technology and what that means for your processes and your workflows, or the way that you communicate. And then now what you've done is you've expanded that inner circle of change, and you're creating change agents across the utility and the organization. And it's all in the sense of how you communicate, understand their threats, acknowledge the past and their current role, but empower them to take advantage of alternatives and the opportunity that's at hand. And really, if you're able to do that effectively, what we have found is the end state tends to come out better than we expected, because now that we have diversity of thought, diversity in perspectives, and technical experts that are really taking ownership of these different things that are affected by digital transformation, they come up with a better way of operating that we never really thought of. Next slide, please. And so looking at that, kind of taking a look at kind of how our processes go and what we've kind of evolved to within our utility. Just to give you a good example of our efforts in how we utilize data to make better informed decisions, better informed purchasing processes, better informed program management across the board. You know, our executive team identified a need to better utilize data and how we can get the workforce better equipped and trained to make data-informed decisions. And so they came out with this, you know, these ideas that are kind of loosely spoken about and very vision focused. And so what we did with that idea is, well, we need to form a working group. So we need to get a data management working group formed with key stakeholders to chart a path forward, right? And so rather than trying to create that change vision from a very small group of executives, we expanded it out a little bit more, looked at the data management group with key stakeholders and said, okay, let's go look at what our vision may be. Let's do some assessments and looking at the workforce in terms of how we're utilizing data today, what gaps do we have, what areas do we need to focus in on, and more importantly, what can this focus in on, gaining access to the mountains and mountains of data that we have, what benefit could that have? And so then we would focus in on building that vision and establishing that gap so that when we go to solidify the why to the employees, the assessments and the surveys we did, it created that compelling need for change because of the way that we went in and kind of did our fact finding. We talked to them through the lens of SCARF. We really adopt the mindset of kind of acknowledging that change is personal, no matter how much we would like to kind of get around that. We have to address the personal side of change, the human side of change, the behavior of change in the very first steps of creating that vision. And that really helped us out in creating that case. So next slide, please. So when you're looking at it, as we went through this process in adopting change and kind of looking at, we're broken into 3 distinct phases. And all of these build on each other. And when you're looking at phase 1 in the planning, it's from the strategic level, and then you break it all the way down to the tactical level. You create that need for change through how you're forming your change vision, how you're communicating and gaining information from employees in their current state or their current reality. And then you focus in on building your change vision with objectives. And we had a whole series of those. And you create a change management team. And that's important, right? We always put technical experts in that are closely related to these tools. We have to branch out and create a change management team that builds a formal plan and that ties in a communication plan. And then as you're looking for initiating that communications plan and you start communicating with your workforce, that's when you start diving deep into moving from, moving to, stop, keep, start, and your measures of what you're going to put in place to how do we know the change is really stuck and it's around for the long haul and that we're not going to revert back to old practices. And then after that, you execute. And so through that lens, we really, focused in on getting all of the time intensive moving from, moving to work done before we even look to execute. We can't do both at the same time. You've got to prepare the workforce, get them comfortable with what's getting ready to come, answer their questions, and then execute from there, giving them that sense of security and certainty moving forward. And then communication was key. So one of the things we did is we have a water app. A lot of our workforce, almost half is out in the field or in the plants, and they don't have access to email, regular access to email communication. So through the mobile phone and iPads that are out in the field, we created a water app, both in English and in Spanish, to push communications out there. Next slide, please. Additionally, we talk about diversifying the communication. So we've got a communicator approach as well as the impact. And diversifying the communication is essential, right? I wasn't on that email or I wasn't at that meeting. This is all new to me. We understand that, with such large organizations, it's hard to communicate with everybody and ensuring that everybody's on the same page. So what we've come up with is we have what we call like a pronto report. So actually that article right there that you see is in reference to deep dives into the data that we have. We sent out that pronto report before they go out, and it's kind of, telling the workforce what they're doing, why they're doing it, what the benefit is. So that's the pronto report gets sent out on an as needed basis when certain things happen or we're planning to do, certain portions of a project. We use that in preparation. The TAP is our quarterly, magazine that goes out to employees that talks about the different initiatives that we have. And we do articles that are written by employees. And so success stories go in there. Our director oftentimes will talk about vision and where we're going and why we're going. And then we hold what we call daybreak dialogues with our director when we're doing certain things and events. That kind of with COVID was a little challenging, but we're bringing that back online to where we could really focus in on ask your questions to the director, right? It's a means to communicate and maybe address some of your concerns, but hear what's going on and the why behind it. And so through these different tools that we have and the way that we communicate with employees on top of your normal meetings and emails really has been beneficial. Next slide, please. And so when we talk about making it personal and evolving, so when we looked at the data, we had to clear the space. And what I mean by that is everything that has gone on in the past, we've got to acknowledge it, but we almost have to hit a reset button. And so oftentimes people were really heavily relying on their processes, really heavily relying on their intuition, especially when we talk at plants. We have operators that have been there for 20 years. Oh, my intuition tells me to do this. Well, there's data that could reaffirm your intuition and that we really need to focus in on. And so clearing the space works well, and being able to just start with a blank slate and get them to make the change personal and see what the future holds for them. In doing that, though, what we found was that there is a tendency to go with the problems of the new technology or the drama of the impact that it's gonna have. I call that the basement. And we want to stay out of the basement. So when you're shifting the focus of the employees, you're making it personal, really get them to focus in on the vision, the planning, and the details. Try to stay away from the potential problems or the conflicts or the rumor mill or the drama that stems around change. Really focus them in on those top three: vision, planning, detail. And that's what gets people kind of engaged and bought into this process. With the data management and the deep dives into data, we really had to focus in on the vision of what is in the realm of possible with access to this information. Next slide, please. And so when we were able to do that and focusing in on what's within the realm of possible, we did many different things. But first and foremost, we enabled them to create use cases and exploration. All right, well, now with this data, hypothetically, what information can you have that informs your programs? And so they started to build use cases and slides and started looking at things of like, oh, well, we can get better predictions in water consumption. Oh, and we can start forecasting, based upon the weather when we overlay this data seasonally, what our demand is going to be. And it really started to take shape when you empower them just to kind of dive in and do that exploration, almost sandbox type. The one thing that we also did in that picture in the bottom left is we held a management retreat. And that picture right there, what you see is we utilized all the different systems. So essentially we identified all the different systems that we use on the car. And then we gave them a tool or gave them an exercise to say, okay, randomly pick 6 systems out and then talk at how each system communicates and what the end state information is going to be once all of those systems communicate based upon the data and that you can use. And so you see there, they lined up in order and each of them said, well, this system talks to this system and this system talks to this system. And now we're going to be able to do this with the ability to merge all of our systems into one. And it really took off from there. Those types of exercises are great. Next slide. So the last thing I'll leave you with in terms of, and we'll hold questions off until Catherine comes, is normalizing digital transformation. First and foremost, you got to recognize the impact and normalize the approach. Change is systematic. Once you find your approach and the process that works well for your organization, continue to refine it, continue to hone in on it, but don't change it. That's just a change within a change. And once your employees started realizing what that process is, there's a sense of comfort, even with change on the horizon, knowing that they understand what the process will be. Lastly, encourage unconstrained big thinking. Don't be restricted by what you think that digital transformation will do for you or what the tool will. And then lastly, recognize, value, and reward digital transformation. When people adopt it, they make a change, they completely uproot their processes, reward that, recognize that, value it. Key in on the small wins that lead to large digital transformation. That keeps the momentum going. And so that normalized digital transformation is essential. That's ongoing, that never ends. It's a continuous cycle. And what we found is the more focus you have on the next transformation, you can begin to see how people will be excited and kind of go, okay, I'm ready. I understand our process. I understand the impact. And it will be less impactful on your workforce. So with that, I'll hand it back to Jim and go from there.
Okay, Shane, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. That's a very thoughtful trip down the path, that you folks have taken. And we appreciate the thoughtfulness and the thoughtfulness, I guess is the best word I could use, that you guys are approaching this. It really fits nicely with this connection, if you will, between, moving to digital transformation and the workforce skills and steps you need to take to make it happen effectively. So what I'd like to do now is turn to our next speaker, Catherine Curtis. Catherine is someone that I've known for about the last 4 years and really have enjoyed interacting and working with her. Catherine is a workforce reliability manager. That's her day job, as I like to say, with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. But just as importantly, she is incredibly important member and board member of an organization called Baywork, which is a really powerful coalition of utilities in the San Francisco Bay Area who really have come together to sort of to help each other, if you will, address a whole range of workforce related challenges. And they are really kind of the premier organization in the country that's doing that. And so without further ado, let me turn it over to you, Catherine, and thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Jim. I'd like to thank Andrew for his inspiring opening message and Jim for the invite, and special thanks to Alec and Tori for their technical support. Next slide. So what is Baywork? Baywork is a group of water and wastewater agencies and stakeholders, including colleges and community-based organizations, with a shared commitment to workforce reliability in the utility sector. That's our baywork.org is our website, and all of our materials are free. Next slide. So from the very inception, we started with this roadmap, and everything we do falls into one of these four categories, specifically developing qualified candidates and providing staff with the information they need to do quality work, because that leads to operational reliability, which is the ultimate goal. Next slide. So early on, we did a survey and we identified these trades and areas as mission critical to utilities. We added the engineer and the wastewater collections operator a couple of years later, and this still holds true today. Next slide. So for our digital worker initiative, the purpose is to help water and wastewater utilities everywhere around the world make more effective use of digital tools and to build the workforce of the future. Next. So we started this initiative in 2019. We did a lot of research on the utility use of digital tools through survey mechanisms. And then we went to Washington to deliver a talk on the workforce implications of digital tools. In 2020, we decided to do a deep dive for a large, medium, and small size agency to really learn more about the challenges and the lessons learned. And we also had a full-day workshop at the Utility Management Conference. It started with about 70 people and it ended with about 70 people. So that was a success. And in that workshop, we identified the different areas that people wanted to learn more about when it came to digital tools. And then we also launched our white paper initiative. Then in 2021, we published the Digital Worker, Effective Use of Digital Tools to Deliver Water Services, the white paper, on our website. It's available for anybody that wants to look at it. We produced a webinar on the Digital Worker for Baywork. It was a Baywork event. That is also on the website. And we also were requested to give presentations to the World Bank through AWWA. We gave a presentation at our training buffet with Baywork, and again in December to the SWIM conference. Next slide. So we had an advisory group to help us with this. We had 33 members from across the United States and Canada, 14 representatives from water and wastewater utilities, including operations staff and information technology experts. And we had 6 representatives from Baywork signatories. We also had 7 representatives from professional associations and community-based organizations, and then 12 consultants that really focused in on this area. Next slide. So this slide depicts the different roles and the tasks that the people in the advisory group performed for us. It started out with giving us written forms on their experiences, lessons learned questions, implementation of tools at their utilities. We held video conferencing to talk about these different areas. When we wrote the white paper, we sent it out and they provided us feedback on the draft. And then we had a couple of sessions for possible next steps that people participated in. And there's a great appendix item to the white paper that's a bucket list of potential next steps that we can do. And we will be holding a digital worker workshop live, and all the advisory group have the option to attend that as a thank you. Next slide. So this is a list of the chapters in our white paper and the different topics that we covered. Today for this webinar, I'm going to focus on the workforce topics, selection of digital tools, organizational culture, initial and ongoing staff training, and developing qualified candidates for digital work. Next slide. So the successful selection and implementation of digital tools is challenging for any industry. And there's plenty of stories out there about projects that didn't go so well. But it's significant for our industry. There's a high consequence if it fails, whether that it leads to drinking water quality issues or managing wastewater appropriately. The details really do matter. So maybe the tool is a great tool for other industries, but may not be the best tool for us. So we have to look at those details. And as I stated, there have been many failed implementations. Next slide. So the planning challenges. A lot of challenges experienced with digital tools and systems can be traced back to incomplete upfront planning. As technology consumers, we live in an ecosystem where we're encouraged to buy the newest version, the latest version, the one with the most functionality, and to have the fastest possible purchasing decisions, but that's not exactly compatible with careful planning up front. A critical piece of the puzzle is, will the utility invest the time and resources that are needed to obtain the sufficient input from staff and to actually analyze what the organization is capable of in implementing this tool? Will new training be needed? Do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the right IT staff? How will it impact the workflow upstream and downstream, for example? Next slide. One of the quotes that was taken directly from the white paper is on this slide. It is common for utilities to discover workflows that will be impacted when they are already in the middle of a software implementation project. I know this may sound funny to you, but oftentimes through retirements and changing roles in the organization, where you start the project and who ends up with the project in the middle or at the end are different, and you don't always know what impact you're having. So will the utility map the impacts and effects of implementing the new tools? Will the utility identify and commit to providing the resources required for the organization to make effective use of the tool? You really need to know what this tool is doing for you, what problem you're trying to solve, and how your organization is going to be able to implement the solution. Next slide. So I leave you with these lessons learned. It's absolutely critical to define the problem you're trying to solve and to seek input from all your stakeholders across the organization. Maybe the tool is used in maintenance, but it will have impacts for operations and impacts for your collections unit, or impacts for other parts of your organization. Assess the preparedness of staff to use the tools. Are they capable now? Will they need training? What part of the functionality of the tool do you want to access? Implement a structured process for mapping what already exists and consider the potential impact of any new digital tool. If you're considering bringing in a tool, there's a purpose, and you might already have something that is that has been determined to meet that purpose. So what is this new tool doing that the old tool can't do? And how are you going to map out what you have and how this tool is going to help you? And finally, create a realistic business case that considers not only the cost of the tool, but what investments will you really need to make to utilize and implement that tool? It goes far beyond the cost of the tool in many cases. Next slide. So possible next steps. Preparing a checklist or a how-to guide to help utilities evaluate their digital preparedness. For example, does this new tool meet our cybersecurity needs? Will we need training? How will it impact different parts of the workflow, different parts of the culture, different parts of the organization? And highly recommend mapping what digital tools you already have that already exist in your utility. And then when you're bringing in new tools, you're already one step ahead in the process. Next slide. I thought this would be a good place to bring in a case study. When we did those deeper dives, the Ross Valley Sanitary District in Marin County, just north of San Francisco, was the small utility we went and took a look at. They have 34 employees. It's a small collections utility, 196 miles of pipe, 19 pump and lift stations. And the operators identified what functionality they needed in the field, what they were missing. So what they did is they collaborated with their business system analyst, Patrick, and talked to Patrick about what they needed. So Patrick went out and researched some options and brought those options back to the operators. And they worked together to develop custom apps. The operators actually helped develop the custom apps to use in the field. And so the operators went to the field, tested the custom apps, brought back to Patrick their feedback. Patrick tweaked and worked with it till they got to a place where they were both really happy. And they determined that they saved about 20 hours per week in the field. The guy that you see on the slide is Steve Mixes. He was the manager, operations manager, that oversaw the whole process and project. What did the operations skill set require? They had to do some data entry. They had to analyze what functionality they actually needed. There were some learning apps they had to learn, and they had to adopt a learning attitude, and they had to give Patrick feedback, and they had to be a team player. Those were basically the skill sets they needed to do this. And the outcome was really great because the operators were involved in the definition of the problem, in the definition of what worked and what didn't work in the field, and they collaborated with Patrick. And so they had total buy-in on the solution, and they were very proud of the result. And you can see some of these apps pictured here for you of what they developed. Next slide. The other thing that Patrick did is he worked with Steve to integrate several systems on one platform so that it was easy for Steve to understand what was happening in real time from that dashboard instead of having to access a bunch of separate systems to get bits of information. And what they needed to do this was Patrick, the right person with the right skill set, who understood technology, who understood coding and research, and could be a team player. And they have some live dashboards that are listed here for you. Next slide. So now we're going to move into organizational culture. The challenges. If your culture does not support a learning organization, innovation, continuous learning, especially accountability, any successful implementation of a new tool can be difficult. Employees, we heard over and over again when we were writing the paper, employees are often concerned that this digital tool or this digital, AI tool or virtual reality tool will replace their jobs, and they were afraid to adopt the tool. Or they were concerned that it would modify what they do to perform their work. Next slide. So what did we learn? One of the people that helped us most with the culture said organizational cultures that are conducive to innovation have open communication. They're supportive of their employees. People are respectful to each other. And not only do they exhibit a willingness to listen and to learn, but there's also a big willingness to collaborate together and to manage change together. Digital tools don't solve problems with organizational culture. Only people can. It's the communication among and between people that define the culture. So the greatest factor in all of this is trust of management, of vendors, consultants, colleagues, trust in their own abilities that, yes, I can do this. I keep having to move this little thing around. Okay, next slide. Possible next steps. We need workshops and webinars and publications that show strategies for change. Shane's SCARF model from the Neuro Leadership Institute is an excellent example of this. So that organizational culture can impact in a positive way the organization's ability to use these tools. Next slide. Challenges on initial and ongoing training. Training is usually the last thing on the budget and the first thing that gets cut from a historical perspective, but we need to change that paradigm. Training on use of digital tools, it's not a one-time or one-size-fits-all. People learn at different rates according to adult learning theory. And so you can't just expect to give training one time and have everybody, could you try again? And have everybody get it. Current training programs are inadequate and out of date. And oftentimes, the time that it takes to train people and the investment required to train people is very underestimated, and that can be a problem. And also, not every utility has trainers, right? So the internal training capacity is often limited. Next slide. Lessons learned. Some members will pick up how to use a tool much more quickly than others. We have a couple guys in my organization that are really, really quick, and they've become power users and help others. Utilities should define the power users who can serve as trainers and guides and mentors for other people, because this will help them with the change management effort. Research is needed on how best-in-class utilities and other industries provide staff training, like the aerospace industry and the transportation industry. How do they train their tradespeople? We should research that and investigate it. Also looking at some tools like digital twins and video game like learning tools, virtual reality and mentoring can take us a long way. And we need to also address the barriers, whether it's an organizational culture barrier around learning and development, or if it's a union agreement barrier. We need to identify those barriers so we can find solutions to them. Next slide. Possible next steps. We need more guidance for utilities on the digital and maintenance skills required in order to use and maintain the software, the hardware, the data collection instruments. For example, instrumentation technicians go out in the field and fix sensors that are connected to many digital tools, and without that, we can't utilize our digital tools. So we need to understand all this. We have to conduct competency analysis for mission critical jobs to identify what are the tools they must use. For example, maintenance people probably need to use work order systems, CMMS systems. Operators probably need to use SCADA systems or DCS systems. Collections people probably need to use GIS systems. So we should figure out what each trade needs to use and what each organization has, and how to train people up on these things. Also provide more assistance to develop training programs and partner with educational institutions. We have 5 colleges in the Bay Area that teach water and wastewater programs, and we need to partner with them so that we can introduce those students to the digital tools that utilities use to do their work. Next slide. So one example of a project that's happening right now is a project that Cheryl Davis, the founder of Baywork, is doing with Jewish Vocational Services. She's doing some analysis to identify what are the skill sets that different tradespeople need. And these are some of the questions that she's asking to the instrumentation techs and the operators. What are the digital tools? What are the analytical skills that you need in order to use them? What kind of training does the utility need to be prepared to offer? And what training is available in both the community for skills and tool specific information? We can't rely on the vendors that sell us these tools to get our training because they don't understand our industry. We have to rely on the people in our industry that understand our industry and how to use these digital tools to provide the services to our ratepayers. Next slide. Challenge. Common perceptions of workers and the knowledge and skills required are really out of date. People don't even think of digital skills when they think of utilities. They don't think of drones or virtual reality or digital twins, but all of these tools can be very effective within our industry. Also, the educational resources may not provide the training that we really need on these tools. The community colleges can't afford to buy these systems to train people on them. And the unions may be out of date with what digital tools are actually being used for different organizations. And every organization is different. Next slide. So the lessons learned. Utilities absolutely need to support on-site learning opportunities like internships and apprenticeships. If we take some of those students from these water and wastewater programs, even if it's just on a short-term basis, and bring them into our utilities so that they can work with a work order system, and that they can see what a SCADA system does, and they can work with some of these digital tools we have, that would take them a long way to understand the skill sets that they're going to need to transition from their academic career to their utility career. I can't emphasize this enough. Hopefully there's money in that infrastructure bill for apprenticeships, because we sure do need them. Next slide. So Baywork is developing a regional apprenticeship program based on the need of our membership. We've got 44 members, and many of them have a hard time finding instrumentation technicians because we're not the only industry that uses them. The transportation industry, the aerospace industry, the manufacturing industry, the gas and oil industry, all are competitors to get these tradespeople. So based on the need, Baywork has decided to develop an apprenticeship program. It was supposed to launch in January. Now it's the fall that it will launch, but it will launch. And we have agencies that are signed up to get some of these apprentices. Isn't that exciting? Also, combining classroom and on-the-job training ensures that candidates will learn the full range of skills that they need to do their jobs in their trade at utilities. Next slide. Possible next steps. Provide support to utilities to upgrade job descriptions and salaries, because nowhere in many job announcements is there the need to understand digital tools or to work with digital tools. And our salaries are not commensurate with the salaries outside of the utility industry that require these skills. So we have a lot of upgrading to do. Also, we need to strengthen our ability to work with educational institutions so that our candidates can be well prepared in this realm, in this arena. And we so need to install internship programs so people in community college programs can see the digital tools for themselves and learn how utilities use them. They may even be able to offer us feedback on the tools themselves. Identify utilities with these messages keep popping up. Identify utilities with the apprenticeship programs so that we can learn from each other. And it doesn't have to be just utilities. Where are apprenticeship programs? Do they have them in the transportation sector? Do they have them in other sectors? What can we learn from each other? Next slide. Next steps for the Digital Worker Initiative. So we have the product that I talked about earlier, the bucket list of possible next steps and how we can collaborate together. And there's a whole list of ideas working on a national level, on a regional level, on an agency level. The use of digital tools is the responsibility of the whole industry. It's the responsibility of the professional organizations. It's the responsibility of the utilities, of the colleges, of all of us, of Baywork, but it doesn't fall on any one agency or any one individual. As an industry, we all have the responsibility to do this together. And it's going to take a great level of effort and attention to be successful. I will give you an example of what Shane and I did as a next step. Shane was the first speaker. We decided that we were going to start a group, and we did. We started a group in January. We're calling that group the Digital Connection Group. It's a think tank group of people across the country that specialize in different areas of digitalization, from cybersecurity to competency analysis, etc. And we come together once a month. Usually there's a presentation, a discussion, and talking about next steps and what we're going to do next. We share resources and materials, and this has been a fertile ground for idea generation and for understanding tools that we don't necessarily use ourselves much better. That's just an example of what Shane and I did on our own. And if you want to get ideas of what you can do, please take a look at the digital white paper and that appendix item of the possible next steps. Next. That concludes my presentation today. I'm open to questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Catherine. We're going to move quickly into Q's and A's here, and Alec and Tori have been fielding those, so to speak, since they've been coming in. So we don't have a whole lot of time left. I'm going to turn it over to them to throw out the questions to the appropriate speaker. So Alec or Tori, go right ahead, please.
Thanks, Jim. So looks like we got a few questions in the Q&A. This first one is a bit long and broad, as Easton says, but both for you, Catherine and Shane, given their discussion about large infusions of federal spending, is there a mechanism / legislation or funding to address workforce facilities? There's commonly failing infrastructure in many of these facilities. If there's something that's been addressed within your work.
Oh, Alec, maybe this is Jim. Maybe if I understood the question, are there federal resources devoted to this? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so very quickly here, and we will share a link to this. EPA has just recently announced grant funding for 10 organizations around the country for various types of workforce programs. That was through legislation authorized by the Congress and money appropriated subsequent to that. We'll send out a link to that, to the available information on those 10 recipients and the program right after the call here. Thanks
so much, Jim. I think in that case, we can move on to the next question from Abely. This is for both Catherine and Shane. Can digital future workforce transformation enhance active listening skills for employees, workforce, and managers alike?
Well, active listening skills are critical for any kind of change management or SCARF process, right, Shane? Yeah. And for training, I mean, if you don't listen, you don't learn. So I would say it would be one of the key skill sets required to move education and the digital transformation forward. What do you say, Shane?
Yes, and really it's what I like to call the byproduct of change in your approach to change. So as you begin to communicate and interact with employees on what the future state holds and what the transformation holds, you begin to identify soft skill gaps and even technical gaps, right? And so through our interactions, we're sitting, active listening and communication has come up numerous times, that you begin to take note of, okay, these are development areas that I need to work on, in conjunction to or separate of the change that is happening to prepare the workforce for the future. So it's nothing that necessarily the process addresses head on, but it's a gap that's identified as you go through your change process.
And I'd also like to say that active listening is just not about the words that people say, but how they say it, their facial expressions. There's all kinds of cues and tonality that communicate where people are. And you need to listen to what's not being said as much as you need to listen to what is being said.
Thanks so much, Shane and Catherine. There isn't any questions in the Q&A right now, so if other people have some, we have probably time for one or two more questions. The one that came in through the chat, Shane, they were asking about what the time frame for the process that you laid out in your presentation, about how long did that take?
So I will say the first time you do it, it's going to take a while, right? Because it's something new, it's something different, and employees probably are not used to looking at change and receiving change that way. But it's heavily dependent upon a couple different factors. One, the extent the transformation of the tool is going to impact the workforce. Is it utility-wide or organization-wide, or is it just a group of teams? That's really going to break it down. I will say that our data management effort and becoming more data-driven, that is really almost a 2-year project, because we got to go team by team across the utility. And so as you look at that and begin to plan it out and how you interact with your workforce, you could try to do carte blanche and do everybody to speed up your timeline, but then you're going to have to go back and address those issues. So it's really in the size and the scope of that change and kind of tailoring and targeting the workforce from there that'll dictate that timeline.
Thanks for answering that, Shane. Not seeing any other questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So Tori, I think with that, we can just move forward to the closing poll,
Okay.
unless someone has a question they want to add in right now.
I'll just give people another moment here, but just wanted to remind everyone that we are posting the webinar slides and recording on that website that I just posted in the chat. And we have a number of other past webinars. So if you are, feeling the itch and getting inspired by all of these talks, feel free to go to that website and click through some of the past webinars that we have. Again, we kind of follow the format of having about 2 speakers and then also have a Q&A portion as well. So you're more than welcome to go through those, and feel free to send those out to your networks, to your colleagues, and we'll be posting this webinar recording and slides within the next week or so.
Yeah, Tori, as we wrap up here, this is Jim Horn. I just want to say thank you to everybody for hanging in there. 2 really excellent presentations. I would call them both thought-provoking and hopefully action-generating. And we really appreciate your time. Thanks to everybody. We will, again, Tori said, we will post all of this stuff. We will also make sure that we get information out to everybody that registered on our next webinar, which we hope to have in May. And hopefully you'll be able to participate on that one as well. So on behalf of EPA, thank you so much. Appreciate your time today, and wonderful. And we've got that last poll, right, Alec?
Yeah, so one more poll we're gonna open up right now. Just in the spirit of continuous improvement here at EPA, we're trying to continuously improve this webinar experience. So we appreciate any feedback through this poll on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest score and 1 being the worst. How would you rate today's webinar? We appreciate all feedback and appreciate the opportunity to keep improving. Gonna let the poll go for a few more seconds here, just so we can get everyone's responses in. And then we will wrap for the day. And we appreciate you all for attending, and greatly appreciate both of our speakers, Catherine and Shane. It was a great process working with the both of you to get this pulled together, and I appreciate the time and commitment and professionalism both of you displayed through the whole process.
Thank you, Alec.
Thank you.
All right, looks like we're closed the poll, and that'll be it for today. Thank you all for attending today's workforce webinar.